Alrighty, Kaysen. So, kind of going over your lesson last night, like what we talked about. Top is your mechanics, and on the bottom is Bryce Harper's mechanics. I have him flipped around to a right-handed hitter stance, really to kind of showcase what we're going to be talking about in our lessons, really what we went over last night with a couple key factors about our swing. So, without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play both of these back-to-back. Really at the same time. And then from there, we're going to talk about it and just kind of compare the two and kind of talk about what's to come and what we'll be working on in our lessons. So here we go. So apologies there. I completely forgot to take off the speed difference there. But as you saw, what we're trying to do, right? We take a look, very first thing that we talked about in the lesson, right? We talk about this back knee right here, right? Take a look at what Harper does and take a look what you do, right? So if you notice about Harper, right? If I were to draw a line right here about Harper, right? Notice how he doesn't go past that line, right? He doesn't go back. All he does is load into this back knee right here, right? And if I were to take a look real quick of his thigh, we got that 45-degree angle that we're talking about, right? And versus, let's take a look. Let's go up to your back knee here. If I were to draw a line right here, or actually, you know what? That's probably not the best line. So let's go right here. If I were to draw a line there, notice your first movement is going back, right? Reason why we don't want to go back. What we talked about in the lesson is we want to build, right? What we don't want to do is go into a position where we can't build off of, right? Think about it too, just in terms of pitching, right? The whole goal of getting into this load right here, both in a sense of hitting and in a sense of pitching, is we want to build power. We want to build momentum towards home plate, right? So what we worked on last night, Kaysen, is that we got into this 45-degree angle right here with our back knee. And that was what we saw was as soon as we picked up our front knee here and our front leg, we automatically had to keep going towards the pitcher, right? And that's what we want. We want that type of energy that we're able to pick up our front leg and immediately make progress towards the pitcher. So that's the very first thing, right? Second thing that we talked about is Bryce Harper's hips. I want you to take a look at what he does with his hips again. Take a look at your hips, right? If you notice, Harper does a really, really great job of getting into his hips, right? And I think also kind of looking at these videos back to back, I have an idea what we can work on for your next hitting lesson. And basically what we can do to, I really think, engage your hips a little bit more. So next time we do a hitting lesson, remind me about putting a hitch. And what I mean by hitch is take a look at what Harper does here with his butt cheek, right? You see that he's almost kind of pointing that towards the pitcher, right? And what I mean by that is we basically want to put ourselves in position that we can get this hip-shoulder separation, which is what we see right here, right? This is what we call hip-shoulder separation. I'm sure maybe you've heard about it, Kaysen. If you haven't heard about it, that's completely okay. But essentially what that means is that there's a separation from your hip or your shoulder to your hip, right? That is what causes velocity for pitching and what causes power for hitting, right? So a lot of times when people talk about hitting is they talk about the power comes from your legs, right? Which is true, but they also leave out that power comes from your hips. And even so, going a little bit further up your core, right? So those are the two things that are really going to help you out there, right? So the biggest thing is working to get in this hip, right? It's explosiveness. Some great drills that you could do on your own, especially if you go to the gym, is weighted ball throws, right? Or like medicine ball throws. Essentially what you're doing is kind of the same thing as what Harper would be doing, but with a medicine ball, when we get to here, that's when we throw. If you'd like me to, I could kind of send you a video of what that looks like and the purpose behind it. But that's another big thing for you. And I think that's really going to help with your power too, right? And even so, let's go back to another thing that we talked about in the lessons. Whenever we take a look at this back hip, watch what happens whenever he gets into it. His shoulders, I would say, they're right here, but they're level, right? This doesn't really give an accurate depiction. His shoulders are pretty level, right? Watch what his shoulders do as soon as he gets into this. Automatically, right? Take a look. So he gets into his back right here, the level, and then immediately gets into this tilt, right? Which causes our launch angle that we want, right? Launch angle and power correlate to not only extra base hits, more power shots in the gaps, and even so, doubles and extra base hits correlate to home runs, right? Especially, you can look at this through any statistic. The more doubles a guy has, the chances are he has a ton of home runs as well because of this launch angle, right? So that's another thing. And the last thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about his shoulder path, right? His shoulder path in his upper half, right? First thing that we talked about, which you actually do a pretty good job already, right? And even so, right here we got connection, right? Same thing how Harper's about to get to in connection. Let me get the video to Harper's stance right here. Harper is connected. And then if you notice what you do is you get out and extend out to the baseball, right? So you're probably asking yourself, well, okay, Max, so I'm getting out to the baseball, right? I am already connecting, right? I'm connecting myself and extending out. So what's the difference between me and Harper? Well, first things first, like we talked about, hip-shoulder separation, but take a look at his shoulder, right? Take a look where his weight goes. If you take a look, if we were to put this into right here when he makes contact, his body is, if he was a righty, he would be directed towards right field. Now, for him as a lefty, his hips and shoulders are going to be directed towards left field, right? But for you, if I were to take a look right here at your hips and your shoulders, we are already standing, or rather facing straight out, right, towards the pitcher. The problem with that is already causing ourselves to open up, right? And what you'll notice a lot of times will happen, especially what we saw in the lesson, a lot of our hits go to the left, either dead left field or low and down, right? Low and left, if you will, because of our hips turning out and our shoulder turning out, right? So whenever we stepped towards right field last time, you did a really, really great job of keeping your momentum going towards the pitcher, right? Which is helping you stay through the baseball, which you did a really great job of after, towards the back end of the lesson, right? Talking about next lesson, right? The big things that we want to work on, right? And especially what we talked about at the end of this past lesson. The two things we talked about were, number one, how do we attack inside pitches and how we attack outside pitches, and why it's crucial of how we attack those two, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit. We're also going to talk a little bit more about pitch recognition, right? We're going to talk about the square a little bit and how to pick up pitchers better, because I could see towards the end of the lesson, whenever we went towards BP tossing, I could tell it was a little bit tricky to pick up, the throws and where it was going to go. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and just some basic things about pitching, right? Or rather hitting. But with that being said, how these lessons are going to go, in my philosophy, kind of like what we talked about last night, Kaysen, is that we're going to start with our foundation of our mechanics, right? And from there, then we're going to work on how do we get back control? How do we tee up a hit every single time, right? Where do we want to hit the ball, every single time we hit? Where is the ideal spot on the ball, right? Where's the ideal spot on the barrel? How do we get to that? How do we attack the baseball? And then from there, it's really getting into, okay, how do we get more power into our swing? How do we correlate more extra base hits, right? How do we do all that great stuff? So with that being said, that's kind of our game plan with lessons. But other than that, really, really excited to work with you going forward, Kaysen, and keep up the hard work, man.